What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show for a second time owner and founder of Coin Onia Counseling Center, licensed professional counselor, ISSTD member, survivor advocate, support and helper, content creator, educator, proud wife and loving mother, documentary and true crime lover, and a woman single-handedly changing how the world sees and understands dissociative identity disorders, Sara Rice, MA, LPC-S. Sara is a beacon of compassion and unyielding dedication, a mental health warrior whose entire existence is devoted to empowering RAMCOA survivors and igniting profound healing amid life's darkest storms. As a certified supervisor for licensed professional counselors and the steadfast wife of an Army veteran for over a decade, she draws from an infinite reservoir of empathy and unbreakable resilience. A mother to 5 radiant souls, she masterfully orchestrates a vibrant family symphony while pouring her heart into her clients in her insatiable quest for wisdom. With a master's degree in counseling from Liberty University and a doctorate in traumatology on the horizon, Sara embodies relentless pursuit of mastery in trauma and mental health. Her trauma-informed sanctuary isn't just a practice, it's a sacred haven of hope, guiding those who've endured the unimaginable toward light and rebirth. Her gift for connection, a profound grasp of mental health's intricate tapestry, fused with genuine, soul-deep care for every unique journey. This isn't mere work for Sara. It's a divine calling to elevate, empower, and resurrect. Her mastery of DID's complexities, her boundless compassion for the RAMCOA community, and her courageous defiance in voicing truths most professionals flee make her a true hero, a luminary we must rally behind, learn from, and celebrate. Sara transcends the title of counselor. She's a blazing supernova of hope, an incredible advocate, and a walking miracle proving compassion's world-altering power. At Coin Onia Counseling Center, she shines a light on the darkness, transforming solace into triumphant empowerment and radiant renewal. Her devotion to survivors is a thunderous anthem to human resilience, proclaiming that even in agony's grip, victory awaits. The first time Sara was on, we discussed her story and how she got into working with RAMCOA survivors, as well as her advocacy work. And we also discussed dissociation, dissociative identity disorders, and some of the nuances of therapy and working with dissociation in a therapeutic and clinical setting. Sara's knowledge and passion are so refreshing and paramount in a time when dissociative disorders are still considered rare and where little to no education on extreme trauma and dissociation is taught in traditional academia. Sara didn't stop learning after her degree was earned. She was just getting started. And now she's paving the way for dissociation and DID to be heard and learned about outside the classroom. And through her work, she is helping to pioneer treatment and healing for survivors who have been failed over and over again. Today, we will be diving deeper into and expanding on this conversation we had last time with the hope of providing more tools and information for survivors, those who work professionally with survivors, and those who are supporting survivors. Sara isn't merely healing trauma. She's unleashing a global awakening, shattering silence and forging a new dawn for humanity's hidden warriors. From the sacred intimacy of her therapy room to the viral pulse of the world's screens, she stands as an unstoppable force, a divine guide for survivors, a revolutionary spark for healers, and living proof that one woman's unbreakable spirit can eclipse the darkest voids. As Sara stated in part 1, quote, "This work will conquer the impossible," unquote. And she's storming the heavens, one survivor set free, one truth unleashed, and one eternal ripple, rewriting destiny at a time. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony to be featured in a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. I've also started up my 3rd YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I'm now streaming new episode premieres from weekly. Turn on your notifications and join our loving community in the live chats every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all on the other side of the screen wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every single guest on this show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, survivor and anti-child abuse advocate, trauma-informed therapist, voice for the voiceless, survivor helper, supporter, and ally, and a courageous pursuer of truth, risking it all to break the stigmas around DID and ritual abuse. The one, the only, Sara Rice. Sara, it is an honor to have you back today. Thank you so much for coming on a second time.
It's an honor to be back. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. We had a great response the last episode. There's such a need for talk about healing. You know, we have, of course, there's disinformation out there and there's half-truths about what ritual abuse mind control is. However, if you find a good platform, you find good people who are talking about it in a very truthful way, the information's out there and it's going to keep spreading. And the next step, I always say, the next most important step after learning is healing. And because this has been so occulted and because it's been so taboo to talk about, because therapists have been targeted for talking about what they're learning, it can be really hard, as we were talking about before we jumped on here, to find good resources to actually learn the ins and outs of the healing process and the stages of healing and what a survivor needs to do in order to get free from the chains that have bound them their whole life, you know. And that's what really makes you stand out and makes you such a hero in your field, is not just the work that you're pioneering behind the scenes, but the fact that you're willing to talk about it publicly. And so I know that this work that you're doing, it's going to stand the test of time and beyond. It's going to be studied for generations. You know, and I'm really excited to get to have conversations like this with you, because I know there's so many survivors that just need to hear some of this information, and so many isolated therapists and clinicians and counselors who don't know where to turn, don't know where to go, you know, and are looking for just any type of inspiration and education that they can to be able to help this incredible demographic that has just been so failed and so overlooked in society. So I thought we'd start, for people listening, our first time we did Sara spent the first part of her episode sharing her testimony and about her business. But for those of you who are new here, I wanted Sara just to give you an opportunity to just recap that, to talk about your clinic, to talk about the work that you do, and to just introduce yourself just in a short manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, again, I'm Sara. I own and I'm a clinician at Coin Onia Counseling Center. A counseling endeavor that kind of happened, the company itself on a whim. Didn't have any idea that I would be working with dissociative disorders. That kind of also came on a whim, where my colleague and best friend was like, hey, do you have a spot in your calendar to maybe give it a try? And I sheepishly said yes. And here we are many years later, and I love it. I've learned from this community. I continue to learn from this community about just the community needs itself, about myself. And so it's been a wonderful endeavor. And then from there, like, you know, kind of behind the scenes, I was talking with Emma about, you know, if you work with trauma, you work with dissociation. If you work with dissociation, you definitely work with those who've had ritual abuse. And so the need to continually educate oneself, which is why I'm doing my doctoral degree, and will continue hopefully to learn from those in the community and just continue to educate myself, because I think it's absolutely vital that we never stop learning and growing and how we can help others, especially if you're in the counseling field. It almost seems like a given to me.
100%, yes. And I think it's awesome that you took it upon yourself to continue learning even after you got out of the traditional classroom, that you didn't just stop there and turn away any client that didn't fit the mold of what you learned and what the textbook said. You know, it's scary that a lot of education is saying how dissociation and DID is super rare and something you'll rarely come across, when in fact we're finding it's actually not rare at all. It's very common, and not just dissociative identity disorder and sort of that end of the trauma scale, but dissociation can have so many different ways and shapes that it can show up in somebody. It can be very mild to extreme, and the fact that it's not studied at all, it's really a shame, because like we talked about last time, there's so many misdiagnoses. There's people taking medications and getting treatments that are not for what they actually have, and ultimately they're just sending survivors in a hamster wheel, and therapists, they're never figuring out what's wrong, and healing's not able to occur. So the work that you're doing is really important, and it's really neat that you've chosen to go public with it. I wanted to ask, so for people listening, we're going to be doing kind of a Q&A today. So last time we really broke down dissociation, we broke down DID, we broke down RAMCOA, ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse, and shared what all of that is. And then also, like I said, we shared Sarah's testimony. And today we're going to do more of a Q&A that's going to be inside of the therapy room and sort of talking from a therapist perspective, as well as giving some helpful tools to survivors and people who work with survivors as well. It's going to be a really great conversation that builds on the one that we had last time. But Sarah, you have gone public with all of this. Before we get into the Q&A, I was just curious. I wanted to know, how has going public and working with this demographic changed your life in a positive way, and what have been some of the challenges that you personally have faced being a part of the work that you do?
I feel I have received, it's been mostly positive. You get now and again, especially as I work with kind of social media and like navigating that area, you'll get people, and I almost think it feels more like I just kind of want to poke the bear, so to speak, of, oh, this is rare, it doesn't exist, it's not real, if you diagnose this, you should lose your license, and all that type of stuff. But for the most part, it's been really great being able to kind of take, what is it like when you sit with somebody who experiences dissociation to the level of it being impactful in life. I kind of want to stray away from like disorder, because yes, it can be disordering and in people's lives. Absolutely. I'm not negating that fact, but being is that dissociation is kind of like a normal response in one's daily life. And in all of us, we've all experienced dissociation. And so most of it has been positive. I've been still very mindful of just like my own safety and protection, and knock on wood, so to speak, it's been positive. Things have gone well. And I'm sassy and I won't stop speaking. So good luck. Even if it were to, not necessarily go as positive, but it's been positive.
I'm really happy to hear that. We do live in a wonderful time right now where more people than not ever in history are willing to be accepting of this. And the people that aren't are sort of the outcasts, where years ago it was the opposite. You'd get mostly negative, and here and there you'd have some positive people sprinkled in that did understand and believed, so it is. And once you overcome that part where you just realize these are maybe cult members, these are uneducated people, these are bitter weirdos who are sitting behind a screen typing insults to therapists. These are trashy people who are doing that. So once you kind of get over that, you realize that, what we're really dealing with, our opposition, they're pretty cowardly, these are.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing is even when somebody, messages me and talks about it being rare, not seeing it, I take solace in knowing, like, I've been sitting with lots of people that this is absolutely happening. So you can't tell me that, I'm not experiencing this with my clients, or my clients are not experiencing this. So I'm like,
What percentage of your clients, whether it's dissociative identity disorder or some level of dissociation, what percentage of clients that you've worked with, if you had to estimate, have some type of dissociation or dissociative response / disorder?
I would say about 85% of those that I work. And I'm not even saying like, because I do work with trauma, but they meet some level of dissociation being significantly impactful enough. So it's up to 85% that I would say. Whether you get something as low on the totem pole, so to speak, which doesn't equate to how significant it is still, as being like unspecified to OSDD to even dissociative experiences and dissociative identities. And then, of course, that also being mixed in with RAMCOA.
Oh my gosh. And here they're teaching that it's rare and that most therapists and clinicians they'll be, probably reluctant to ever encounter a DID patient in their entire career. And here you are saying with your own practice, 85% have some type of a dissociative, they're on the scale of dissociation somewhere, whether it's DID or otherwise.
They have, and it's not to say that the 15% don't have dissociative responses. Absolutely, I would say that they do. I just maybe wouldn't say it's, markedly enough to like list under one of those criteria, but they're absolutely having dissociative experiences.
Oh my goodness. And so kind of building on that, what are some signs and symptoms that you would look for that someone has experienced mind control or ritual abuse?
Yeah. So when we talk about like mind control and ritual abuse, it's really, for me, it's easy to kind of feel the state in the room of the person. I would have to say, and the biggest fear is when somebody who's had ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse kind of comes into the room. A lot of clinicians, because the education doesn't really, it doesn't touch it at all. I can't even say like really touch it. It doesn't touch it. You might get people who you would be like, oh, maybe as a new clinician or even a seasoned clinician would think, oh, this is psychosis. That this stuff doesn't really happen. Like you maybe will hear stories that seem that they're grandiose. You may, of course, if you're experiencing somebody with dissociation, while they're in the room with you, could almost seem like they're not in the room with you. That would be kind of like if somebody's coming in and sitting with you. And then other kind of things is a lot of what you're going to tell. We talk about kind of like the programming with RAMCOA. You may get what would often be seen as like maybe a borderline, and I feel like it's more of a CPTSD response, where you have programs running for those who've experienced RAMCOA, where it's, oh, I'm good, I don't need this. Or you may get maybe some that are like verbally combative, not physically, but verbally combative of like, I don't need this, I'm not going to do this, I don't trust you, like those types of scenarios where it's so easy to kind of take, and it's definitely to the detriment of those that are coming in for help, and sadly to the advantage of those who are perpetrating these crimes, unfortunately, that a lot of the things that do come out can mirror these other, can mirror psychosis or somebody with a borderline experience. So you really have to kind of sit and parse out really and truly what is going on, and you really have to check your own biases.
Absolutely. Yes, that's great advice. And speaking of the safety that you were just talking about, how there can be, survivors that are still maybe in the cult, or they're not 100%, out of whatever they are trying to get away from, and they might not even know it. In your experience while dealing with different RAMCOA survivors who are looking to part ways with whatever it is that they are, or were born into or involved with that ended up fracturing them, how can these survivors develop safety when it is obviously very common that targeting, things like gang stalking, the organization of honeypots and different people that are put into their pathway to lure them back occurs so much after they try to leave?
Yeah. So it's really, the interesting thing is really being, once we're in the room, and we're talking to those who've had these experiences. And I am thinking of like a particular client of mine where it's not necessarily that they are ready or going to even separate themselves. I specifically speak to the system as a whole, and I actually technically speak past and talk to the system as a whole in regards to, okay, so if that connection is still going to happen, how can we safeguard certain information? Like something as simple as sharing about doctors' information, what doctors they're going to, what information they're getting, even seeing me, that they have like parts that are set to report back. And it's like, it's specifically talking to those parts because they're real and they exist and they were created in order to either report back, to keep files for the organization. And you really have to speak to giving them power, that they are now in charge of making those choices and they get to choose what information, because some of this connects to family of origin with moms and dads. And it's not necessarily as easy to say, I'm going to cut contact. So we really work to kind of safeguard that information on a case-by-case basis of taking a container and putting that information in there safely, containers that the organization doesn't get to touch. They don't, they may have had this file cabinet over here with information. They don't get to have this box here with information. And so it's really sitting and kind of like parsing out what in each situation, like what client needs, and always being prepared to speak past the person that you're talking to, because that's one of those myths of I need to speak to the person who can handle therapy, like I need to talk to them. And it's like, no, you got to talk past them, like they're human beings that need to be listened to.
Yes. And speaking of myths, what are the most common myths and misconceptions about DID, in your opinion, that you've come across?
Well, there's, of course, I want to get a t-shirt of something I would know what, that it's rare. It's like, that's a great myth. That I only need to speak with fully functioning parts. That is absolutely a myth. You speak to all the parts, from those who maybe don't have names and are numbers because of the RAMCOA abuse, to those who may be parts that are non-human. And that's another myth, that those type of parts don't exist as well. And they do. And they have purpose and they have reasoning for why they kind of come into the system and why parts may or may not have names. So just the myths surrounding, who to treat, who I should treat, who I should talk to, that I have to have IFS training, internal family systems, and you don't. I can't stress enough, in order to talk to somebody who has dissociative experiences and dissociative identities, it's really a matter of listening and forming the therapeutic relationship and allowing what needs to unfold in the therapy room unfold, as opposed to trying to control the situation. So those are really big myths that I have in, it's rare, talk to only certain parts, you got to have IFS, and the myths can go on and on and on of what, people on the outside believe, it's threatening, like life threatening, or, they're not safe to be around. Oh, did you see that movie Split? No. It's not like that. It's not like that at all.
Yes. And that's such a good point. That is a really big misconception that people have, is what a switch looks like, because how it's been popularized in movies, in our, kind of entertainment, in books, that it's always this extreme change where somebody's a Jekyll and Hyde, and it's so obvious when somebody switches. They have like this super happy good side, and then all of a sudden they're evil, or, they have this dark side. And of course, sometimes it can be like that, but to say that that's how it always is, it's actually probably very rare that it's like that, to where it's super easy to spot. And that was another question that I had for you. For therapists, I think too, if they haven't learned about switching, if they haven't learned about the nuances, the subtleties, they can also maybe think that, well, this person in front of me, I don't see any visible switching like how I did in the movies that I watch. So this person can't have DID because they're not experiencing that symptom. What is a more realistic way of what switching might look like in a therapeutic setting for somebody who does have DID? What's a more normal way to tell if somebody's switching, or if they're moving between parts as they're speaking to you?
Yeah. So I absolutely like to highlight the fact that there are covert and overt systems. So covert, you're going to see, and I have more covert systems, meaning like the system itself is not supposed to be known. You're not really, the point is to not know that they're switching. It's a safety mechanism. You're not supposed to necessarily know that parts are there. But to know the difference between like a covert system, which is, more under the radar, you're not going to notice the switching. You may notice like, oh, at one point you were saying this, and now you've kind of taken and done a 180. To overt systems who you might see more of that switching of, oh, I can tell you're switching parts. Okay, I see what's happening here. But really to be able to recognize it is to educate oneself on parts. Educate yourself on your parts. Educate yourself on parts work. What does that look like? Because you're going to get more of an understanding of, oh, do you think that's a child part that could be, maybe lurking behind? Do you think that's a child part who could be fronting at the moment in the therapy room? So that's going to be your absolute biggest component for success in understanding. And once you get to know your clients, you're going to also know, like, without even having to say like particular names of who they are, you're going to kind of know if something is representative of maybe a little, or something is representative of any particular part, human, non-human, and what that's going to look like. So really garnering and knowing your clients and trusting their experiences is going to help you to be able to see that, yes, you're going to have some overt switching, but most of it's going to be covert, and you're kind of have to really see like, aha, I noticed there that you kind of, maybe you switched your tone, or maybe you switched, just your gaze. Like sometimes some people's faces will look different. And that's very possible as well, to know. Other than the overt sides of voices changing, that type of stuff, faces will change as well.
Yes. And I think, bringing attention to that is so helpful in like healing for survivors, because that's probably a struggle that a lot of them deal with too. People won't believe them because they're like, oh, you say you're dissociative or you have multiple personality disorder. Well, show me your personalities. Why don't you have these Jekyll and Hyde personalities, And it's just really like another form of gaslighting and of the, ill-informed, the ill trauma-informed ways that we've been conditioned as a society to think of something like this, as being always overt, when, like you said, it can be very covert. It can be very subtle. There can be very subtle things. They didn't, a designed system, it was designed to be camouflaged so that when the switching occurred, it wasn't obvious to the outside world. These were people and, put in very dangerous situations, and who were trained to do, really illegal things a lot of times. And, that couldn't be the case where they're sending people out into the world that are so obvious with being disordered, quote unquote. It was designed to be very smooth and something that wasn't super easily detectable. But I love how you said, like, look for the subtleties, because that really is it. Did the voice pitch change just a little bit? Did their eyes change, or the way that they hold their body, or, just like these little tiny things that we might take for granted not having this. If we didn't grow up RAMCOA and have dissociation ourselves, it can be really, helpful to just kind of learn body language a little bit whenever you're talking with people that are in front of you. And then with that, I wanted to ask, and on top of recognizing this, obviously there's covert and overt ways. How can this recognition of dissociation and switching from a therapist perspective help a client get better faster?
Yeah. So the point is, you need to get to know the parts of the self and the self states. And really, it aids in breaking down the kind of like the shame stigma, for sure, of like, nobody's going to believe me. Oh, I'm just being melodramatic. It gives us that work with clients as therapists a chance to be able to say, like, did you notice? Did you notice that you had a different self state? Did you notice that there's different emotions? Did you notice there's different thoughts that go around it? And being able to be in hopefully what they deem as a safe space, to be able to explore, what are parts' needs? What are they saying? What do they not like? What if, and rewrite narratives that need to be rewritten under their own power, instead of just kind of remaining in that covert state of, especially those who have RAMCOA, and essentially having those parts built for jobs, every part having a job, in order to facilitate the needs of the organization.
And as you were talking about on the last episode, we were sort of comparing DID with other conditions such as bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia. And without understanding the dissociation switching piece and not being able to identify that, which isn't always easy. Sometimes, a lot of therapists that I've met, have said that some clients, or sometimes before they knew what they know now, it took them a long time before they could, make a proper analysis and kind of diagnosis on the dissociative piece of their clients. So I understand it's not always going to be, the first day that the person comes in, you're going to automatically be able to tell. But I also think without understanding it at all and without being able to see it, that's how a lot of these patients are getting misdiagnosed as being bipolar and being put on these different medications to treat something that they don't have, or being told that they have schizophrenia, or being pushed into, psychiatric wards and these different treatment centers. And I think too that really hurts survivors when they're not looked at properly, and when what they're going through isn't recognized by the therapist in front of them, because the therapist is only going to slap a diagnosis of things that they've learned instead of the things that somebody like you went the lengths to learn outside of the textbook.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we talk about, I just recently did a training. Like I said, I'm continuously learning, and I absolutely agree with the facilitator's statements of, kind of some of the most dangerous place for those with dissociative experiences is inpatient, because you don't get to have the breadth of knowledge in regards to dissociative disorders. You're the higher likelihood of, especially those with RAMCOA, the higher likelihood is you're going to get treatment for something such as a psychosis, such as a schizophrenia, and maybe a bipolar, versus, hey, how is dissociation affecting? Are there dissociative identities that could be affecting the situation as well?
And I think you said last time that bipolar, schizophrenia, there may be instances where dissociation is part of that, but overall, that's not looked at in the clinical diagnosis. There's other things to look for. And so dissociation and dissociative identity disorder is like a whole separate thing that can really make or break treatment if the therapist or clinician can recognize, oh, this person's dissociative in front of me. They're not bipolar. They're not schizophrenic.
Yeah.
So now I can know how to treat them. I need to treat them this way instead of the way that I would treat somebody that has bipolar and, schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder. So I think it's so important. And I was shocked by that too, whenever you had said last time that, like, most of the people that you've done counseling with who had bipolar or schizophrenia, dissociation was almost never a part of the equation. It was a whole different thing having to do with RAMCOA. It was a whole separate thing, so it's crazy that that there's not more education on this, because you just see how easy it would be to just funnel all of these clients into these other labels that have absolutely nothing to do with what they went through and what they're currently experiencing.
Yeah, especially when you talk about a bipolar and you talk about schizophrenia, those are physiological changes that are actually happening in the brain. You know, we're talking about chemical changes that need to be rectified by proper, you know, medication regimen and continued therapy. That's not the case with dissociative disorders. They are, you know, absolutely trauma laden. They're not structural changes, though things can happen physiologically, of course. So you really, it's absolutely, and it's doing such a disservice when you're treating something that is not a structural kind of change in the brain. It's a structural change in kind of like the, you know, in terms of the makeup internally and how the self is identified.
Yes. That was a great way to explain that. And so I want to talk about the kind of stages of healing and what you go through as a counselor, and what a survivor can maybe expect stepping into a therapy room. For the work that you do, what's the starting point for healing once you find out, okay, this person is dissociative, they're RAMCOA, they're on the spectrum of being more extreme on the dissociative level? What's the starting point for healing, and what are some of the stages that clients go through to facilitate healing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing I absolutely can't stress enough is this is a lifelong process. You may, you know, have be in therapy for years upon years. And I always pause there and say, you have to understand this is something, you know, you were learning. It's developmental trauma. So you were learning this along potty training. You were learning this how to eat. You know, I think we kind of briefly touched on this before. So because it's developmentally, you're taking something that was essentially learned and ingrained into the body. And it's, especially when we talk about RAMCOA and that whole process, something that was ingrained from such a young age is going to take time, and time is okay. And you might have more than one therapist, and that is okay. Meaning, hey, I might work with you for a while, and then it might be time for me to retire. And so we have to kind of seek and transition. Like, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're not healing because, oh, I am in therapy long term. And it's like, you know, don't, like, we'll work through that shame of, you know, feeling shameful that you haven't been able to heal. I mean, this is something so significant. It has encoded who you are. And now we're kind of taking that. And especially with RAMCOA, we're actually working to decode and create the self that should have been created by birth and didn't get a chance to. So just know it is a long process, and we might stay in stabilization for a long while. We may touch on some trauma that comes up, especially if you have flashbacks that happen. And then we kind of stay in that stabilization area, and we maybe we'll, you know, dip another toe, and, you know, maybe we'll dip a toe into like the next part of like the treatment phase, and then we may go back, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. It's a process that you should have had from birth on up with safe, loving environment, and that's not what you got. And now we're just taking the time to be able to create, like, what does that safety look like for you? What does stabilization look like? And processing through and changing kind of like the narrative itself.
Speaking of stabilization, in your experience, are most clients that have RAMCOA, the ID, that come into your office, what percentage of them are destabilized, and what does that usually look like to get them to a place of stability?
Yeah. So it's really easy. And I think that also lends to why clinicians would look at something like a psychosis or a schizophrenia. Because when we talk about those who are destabilized, especially if we're having flashbacks, those flashbacks, one has to understand that it's like you're living and breathing the experience as if it's happening in that moment. And that's the difference between when we talk about flashbacks and like just thoughts of trauma. It takes an actual act to get one out of those particular situations, and it's exhausting. And we can talk about destabilization as in, I've just had recently where, certain programs are running. Programs meaning the organization has set forth for you to, whatever narrative they particularly create around getting help and healing. And if that kicks in, and say somebody in the system sabotages going to therapy, I just remind my clients, and you really need to understand with dissociative clients, but also like those that have RAMCOA, that these situations are going to happen. And I tell them, okay, I'm here for the next time we meet, and that's absolutely okay. And they talk about it next time and what happened, and really creating that space so that they can actually talk about why they missed the session is really key in understanding. So there was a program running, and that's why I didn't make the session. Got it. So really being available and understanding the needs of, because we can't always stop it in the moment. Even if, I love, and I'm available most times for clients to kind of text and check in. But just understanding it, we may have to go back and try to understand what's going on thereafter, and giving them tools for if they are in those flashbacks, how can we get them out of those episodes?
And it's amazing that you've been so consistent and so compassionate and loving in those instances where parts have come out that aren't as happy as some other parts that the system is working with you. How do you build rapport as a therapist with those parts that can either come out and maybe berate you, come out and self-sabotage, or just want to skip out on the session? How have you been able to sort of make peace with those parts that are trying to get the system and the body to push you away?
Yeah, it's understanding it. I mean, you have the old adage that not everybody's going to like you 100% of the time. It's the same with systems. Not everybody's going to like you. And sometimes they like you, but they have programs running that are like, oh, red alert, I have to run. I can't connect to this person. It's really, and I'm not saying like I don't have parts of myself that are not like, oh, that makes me really, like I check myself and those parts. But really understanding when I say don't take it personal, I really mean don't take it personal. If in fact, and it's very rare, even I would say between my colleague and I, those that have dissociative disorders, despite kind of some of those ups and downs, are actually some of the best and most consistent therapy goers. Like hands down, the most consistent. So like really just taking into consideration the needs of the clients and being able to say like, I understand, I got it. That makes sense.
I love that so much, because I think, that can be sort of a self-destructive behavior that therapists don't know that they're doing, in not having compassion when those moments arise and firing those clients or making them feel horrible for the parts that came out that, didn't trust them or didn't want to be there or were very skeptical, or like you said, had programs running where they were trained to push a therapist away if the system ended up going to get help. And so I think that's so important, because I can't even imagine, being in kind of that time of need, and then the therapist, somebody that you finally open up to, is, sort of kicking you out and not even wanting to hear you just because they don't understand what's happening in the body. So
Yeah.
It's amazing that you've, been able to be such a compassionate and like safe space, because I'm sure that can be hurtful sometimes. A lot of times these parts aren't the nicest that come out, you know, in those times. They can't, they're trained to be mean. And like you said, it's because they were doing some of the most important work, because they had to be a little bit more isolated. They couldn't let a lot of people in their circle. They did some of the most important work. They were the hardest workers, some of the highest trained parts in the system, and which, like you said, can also probably make them some of the most consistent and best therapy clients, because they're so hardworking and so resourceful and reliable, you know. But you have to sort of get that trust from them and get them to buy into what you're doing, and to know that you're safe and you're just there to help. You're not trying to self-sabotage them. You just genuinely want to help. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's a good experience.
And so, sort of going off what we were just talking about with the stages of healing and the process of going through different stages of healing in therapy, what I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between, say, processing memory and trauma versus deprogramming?
Okay, so processing a memory, when we talk about that, is going through, say, a particular traumatic scenario with as much detail and consent that is there in regards to, let's process the shame from that we're feeling. Let's process, like, do you blame yourself? Let's process, like, do you feel safe now? When we talk about deprogramming, you're really, this is kind of happening maybe before we're even trauma processing memories, but we kind of have to look at the person and understand, okay, so they have a program where they were taught or told. When I say taught and told, I'm using those terms lightly. It is more than just lightly told, don't go get help. It's a systematic, often ritualistic experience where if you go get help, whoever helps you, like something like this, whoever helps you is going to get hurt. You don't want to hurt somebody. And that's something that is ingrained in somebody of, like, okay, if I go get help, whoever I ask for help is going to get hurt, and I can't have that. And so that's a program that's running. And for those that I work with, I really have to say, let me be in charge of my own well-being. I am making the choice to be here to work with you. And I have agreements with clients. I will tell you if I notice anything going on, if I notice things that need to be brought to your attention, and you will do the same with me. But I am in charge. And so that's working to kind of deprogram, you know, that thought process that was put into somebody. It's you're essentially taking, I kind of like taking blocks. I just imagine like taking blocks out of somebody and putting in new building blocks of everybody that you come across who helps you may or may not stay safe. They have to be able to make that decision. You don't have to worry about that decision anymore. And so it's really, it's, you know, something as simple as like changing the narrative. I mean, if I could put it in the absolute basic of terms, changing the narrative and them learning and understanding that I may connect with people and things happen. And, you know, like that is the difference between we're processing a memory versus we have to decode before we can even touch a memory.
So it's really sort of reverse engineering the belief systems that were put into a survivor their entire life, all the way, like you said, from childhood. They were engineered in a way to hold and carry specific beliefs, and every part has these different belief systems, different alliances, different agreements, all different, you know, right down to like maybe even religions that they practice or genders that they are, like you said, verbal, nonverbal, human, not. And so being able to help them understand, you know, what they were taught and told versus now they get to choose that has to be such an empowering thing for you to be able to help navigate somebody through that and get them to be like, oh, I thought this all my life and I don't have to think that, or I don't have to do that. Wow, I can choose. Like, I get to make a choice. That has to be really neat for you as a therapist to, get to be in those moments where you get to see that transformation firsthand.
Yeah, it is. And I always remind, sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that's okay. And we're going to just keep moving forward. That's all. Like, really being, they talk about in grad school, which one thing that I absolutely think that it gets right is the therapeutic relationship is really the biggest motivator for change. And so really sitting and believing somebody who comes to you and we start uncovering that there's RAMCOA, like, that really is huge to have somebody who actually believes you.
Yes. And for you, what was it that really validated your willingness to believe RAMCOA survivors? Because that can also be a hurdle for a lot of therapists. They're trained to entertain the beliefs of their clients, but they don't always align with them and can therefore maybe not be very helpful in treating them or treating them long term, because the stories just seem so fantastical or they're so traumatic, the therapist can't even really deal with it themselves. For you, what was it that where you're like, okay, I 100% know that this is real? Like, it seems so fantastical. It's so unbelievable what these, my clients are telling me. But like, I know 100% that this is true. Was it a patterning? Was it a very like a real life validation that you saw in your area where you were able to prove some things? What for you was it that just like solidified your alignment to your beliefs in your clients?
I think it really was absolutely knowing and believing in dissociative disorders. I mean, that helped. It didn't mean that I didn't have those thoughts of, can this really be real? Knowing the capabilities of this world and society, I think, is huge in saying, oh, if in fact one does not believe any of this is happening, I'm saddened by that. Because you could go, oh, one side, like, oh, this stuff doesn't happen and it's fantastical, to, oh, maybe all the way over to like, not intense belief as in, oh, this really happens, but that's where they kind of put the conspiracy theorists, they might put them there. If you don't think that this stuff is really happening, and that's kind of what checked me, you have something wrong. You have something wrong. Look at our news on a regular basis. And that's kind of how I had to look at it. Like, look at the stuff that happens. Okay. Look at the patterns of what people are telling you. Look at the consistencies of what people are telling you. It's like, okay, that really got it for me. That really got it for me. And being able to be open with my clients, having our dialogue together, to share, has really been quite an enormous change factor for me.
And did you also receive any type of physical validation in your own research, looking in the area that you live in with the demographic of clients that you have? Because you work specifically in Michigan. Have you been able to sort of corroborate locations or different things that you've been told in the physical world too?
Yeah, some of that I have. I try to be careful on my computer what I search up. So I haven't done as much digging as what I would like to, because I know that there's a lot more to be done, but just utilizing sources that kind of have already compiled information, utilizing those organizations and like reading their material that's already there, is like, aha. Even in regards to, I saw firsthand what military did to my husband on the most basic of levels. And so I know that it goes up from there. I'm not foolish enough to believe that if they mind controlled my husband as he went into basic training, to think that organizations are not doing this to other people. So yeah, that kind of was eye-opening for me as well, being in the psychology field and like knowing kind of like how even just one organization talking about the military in itself and how they work. I was like, okay, I see what's happening.
No, you're so right. And a lot of people know that our world is all messed up. They don't feel good living in it, in the fact of everywhere you look, like you said, you turn on your TV, you look around, there's violence everywhere, there's hate, there's division. They push so much negativity and toxicity on us every way they can through every single channel that they possibly can. And then just historically, if you look at wars, if you look at the things, right down to even slavery of what we have learned of it. This is obviously a covert form of slavery, but we've seen historically that, politicians and different, people in power literally had slaves at their house. And then you look at events like the Holocaust or, Rwanda, and you see just like the absolute degradation of society and the capabilities of just disgust and just nastiness that people are capable of. And you're so right. We just think that just doesn't exist, except in like these special circumstances, these events that happen in history, that these people aren't also walking amongst us in society and potentially in our communities, in our states, in our cities, that these types of people just don't exist except in history books. It is really, it's humbling to look at that and to realize, we really live in such a child abuse society that, whether witting or unwitting, there's so many different generational patterns of trauma that are constantly being passed down, all the way from the violent level of RAMCOA to, alcoholism, domestic abuse, depression, different ways that dysfunction happens in family that can really affect somebody growing up. So you're absolutely right. And that's like a humbling thing, I think, for anybody to look at. And there's really, like you said, when people come and they're like, that doesn't exist. It's like, really look at all the times in history when it has, and you just think that it just stopped. Like that doesn't exist at all anymore, that this level of depravity just eradicated itself from our planet and like it's gone. Come on, people.
Yeah. I also further think those who are out of grad school should work in those places where lower socioeconomic classes voices are at, whether it's community mental health or I worked with a pregnancy center. So I actually sat with those who in broken English had spoken about being trafficked, being like having those experiences. So the more that you sit with those people, and obviously somebody in broken English is not lying to me about having their passport taken, having, being undocumented, being hit and abused. Like these are not stories that nobody's going to come sit in a pregnancy center and be like, I know what I'm going to do. Like these are real stories being told. And sadly, it is quite often that the lower socioeconomic, group, that their voices are stifled, and immigrants and yeah.
You're so right. And that actually brings up another good point on the other side of the equation of belief. If you sit and listen to enough survivors of any of these types of abuse, trafficking, organized abuse, mind control, there's also consistencies in the stories. It might be a completely unique life that they lived, and different, abusers, different locations that they were taken to, different experimentation, whatever it is. But there's these little consistencies that are mixed in between complete strangers, such as dates that they, were abused on with, occult rituals, different types of abuses that were done to them as children at certain ages and different types, certain locations, certain abusers that are constantly, named over and over again from complete strangers. And so to me, it's like the proof is also in the testimony. It's just so many people won't take time to sit and listen because they write it off right away. But that's something that I was certain that there was only a few people that had ever gone through this in the whole world, because that's what I was told too, that this just doesn't exist. And doing this podcast, I just can't believe the overlap. And for people who are like, oh, they're all fake memories, it's like, really? So everybody who's ever had a quote unquote fake memory happens to share the same exact information. Their memories are all horrible and awful. There's no like good memories about like really happy things that pop up amongst these fake memories. And, it's always the same absolutely degrading, disgusting things that people come up with, and like the same consistencies. It's strange that people don't, kind of think about that before they make these comments, because when you actually work with survivors like you do, I'm sure you get that all the time, where you're like, wow, this story's so different from this other client. But man, that little piece of information, it's literally the same. It's the same ritual that this other client told me about, or the same type of experimentation, or the same abuse, or, you see this overlap that's like absolutely undeniable that this is real too.
Yeah. And why am I seeing the same kind of system makeup versus organic to those that with RAMCOA? Like, why is that consistent with the particular intentional, splitting and that type of stuff? Like, it's that's not like suddenly you get this criteria of somebody, schizophrenia, you'll have negative symptoms and that type of stuff, like your lack of affect and that type. We don't have, that's not the same. That's because the experiences, it takes a different form, but it's like they're using the same tools. Like their houses may look different, but the tools that they're using are the same.
Yeah. And like for example, one thing that you mentioned was reporter parts. Like that's something you've obviously seen time and time again, that there's a part in many of your clients, if not all of them, that are RAMCOA, that specifically have the same exact role of being a reporter. And so that's just random too. Like it just happens to be that way. It's not something different that is put into all of these survivors. All these strangers just happen to have the same exact, like you said, kind of hierarchy. It just, after a while, it becomes silly that this is still denied at all, because all you have to do is just listen to testimonies. But, sadly, and unfortunately, that's like the last thing that they want us to do. They want us listening to anybody but actual survivors. They don't want us hearing that, because they know society would catch on and be like, wait a minute, there's something going on here. There's some similarities happening that I can't overlook. But instead, they want us to just think that this was done and over with in the 50s and 60s when MKUltra ended, and it's done. It was just done to some adults that they gave these drugs to, and we've never done it again, especially not to kids. We're never going to talk about the kids, and it's very interesting. And so I love that you've been able to sort of find that validation too, and I hope it encourages other therapists to sort of look at it from that point of view, that no matter how fantastical the story may seem, don't write it off. Keep listening and keep comparing and take notes and look for that overlap, because in there you'll find the truth. There might be some things that are very unique to one client that you might not ever meet somebody that has the same experience, but likely you're going to see patterning that comes along where you're like, oh, okay, I know what this is. I've seen it a million times. And so let's talk about something that you've brought up a couple of times. You've brought up flashbacks. So I wanted to see, in your opinion, obviously being a counselor, a therapist, being a clinician, somebody who works with therapists, I think that it would make sense for survivors to want to experience that could be a safe setting for survivors to go through flashbacks, potentially, if that's, able to happen in the therapy room. And I wanted to see, what are some ways a therapist or therapeutic setting can be helpful in processing flashbacks? And then if, say, a survivor is not able to get to a clinical setting during a flashback, how can they stay grounded while they're going through that, say, at home or elsewhere?
Yeah. So it seems really like it would be trivial, but it's really true. Sensations. And you kind of have to find the sensation that's safe for you. For instance, we've had clients that smell is a safe sensation to be able to utilize to get out of a flashback, whether that's with particular essential oils. Being mindful, of course, if a sense of smell is sensitive, what particular smells are safe smells. So that could be something, some temperature, having ice in hands, Really just being mindful of what is a safe kind of, and if you get a chance to kind of explore this before one gets triggered in to a particular flashback, that is absolutely key. If somebody's not in the therapy room, and if they are in the therapy room, this can kind of be done too, is you're really just going to kind of sit with them. And it's kind of asking them, what do you need to be safe? Because we as therapists often want to say, you're safe here, you're safe here. Okay, they're not feeling that at the moment. That means that's null and void. It doesn't mean anything. Their system kind of has to come to the understanding that they're safe and that they're in the present. And it's really finding what do they need at that particular moment. Can you take a drink of water? Is that something that you can do? And that activates the sympathetic nervous system and really gets that kind of going. And just really taking time and having the patience to aid in pulling them out. So even if someone is with a loved one, or they're by, have the unfortunateness, which to be by themselves, to really kind of have an idea of, oh, I'm going to the freezer, and which is courage in itself when you're in a flashback. And again, I'm saying they're living and breathing in these experiences. This is not just, oh, I'm having bad memories of the trauma that I went through. No, flashbacks are, you're actually in the moment of what is going on. So being able to bring yourself, like, courage, kudos to you, to get that essential oil, to get that, maybe that temperature change item, to go get that drink of water, to sit and kind of breathe, maybe to reach out to somebody. Maybe that is huge, that you're reaching out to somebody for help because of programming, or just plumb shame for reaching out for help. So yeah, patience with yourself, and for therapists, counselors, just patience to sit with them. You may have to offer 5 different things. Would you like this? How about let's try a drink of water? And just knowing that that's what you have to do. And like a lot of therapy and the techniques, really kind of just comes with the idea of you just gotta be patient. Something may or may not work, and that's okay. And we're going to keep going to figure out what it is that we need to be doing.
And I love how you said, like, anchoring into the present, because how you were explaining, their bodies and minds are living in the memory that happened in the past. They are not able to recognize that, oh, I feel so unsafe, and there's all these memories are so horrible, and I'm so scared, and I'm in pain because I'm experiencing what I went through. It can feel like you're brought back to that moment, and your body reacts in that kind of fight, flight, or freeze mode where you're overcome with whatever it was that you were being affected by back then. And I love that you said to kind of anchor it back in the present, because that can be very calming too, to be like, okay, there was danger happening in my memory, but that was whenever I was 3 years old. I'm 30 now. It's not happening to me in this moment, even though it feels like it.
Yeah.
I'm safe here. I see my therapist who's keeping me safe. I have a safe home to go to after I leave here, and I'm safe in this moment. My body is just experiencing something. I'm not actually there, and so many people do that in real life too, even with just, minor traumas. It's really easy under stress to almost, react like, our bodies will react like there's a lion chasing us, when in fact we're just sitting in our office at work, like on our computer, and we're panicking about something. We're not in actual danger. Our bodies are just reacting like it under stress and duress. And it's good. That's a good anchoring point for anybody that has any type of like anxiety or flashback, is to figure out how you can manage your surroundings here. And like you said, use your senses, smell something or touch something in front of you, and become acquainted with the present. That way, even though your body's suffering with something from the past, your mind can start to be at ease that you're not in danger in that present moment.
Yep, absolutely.
Do you personally, have you had a lot of clients have flashbacks in front of you? Is that something that many therapists can expect if they're working with this demographic, that they're going to experience that?
They're going to experience them. The really tough thing is most of the time what happens is it happens outside the therapy room. which is like really tough. If you can, as therapists, I understand boundaries are key, and I have learned the significance of boundaries. Maybe for those particular clients, having a way to at least reach out, because it, like, even if it's texting, even if you say, I text, I may not answer you back, but sometimes just the connection of texting somebody is enough to help, like, with the flashback. And then you can say, okay, we'll process what, is going on, when we're in session together. But really, if you can, and I believe it's possible because I do it, having a form of connection for clients.
Yes. That's a really great piece of advice too, just to have somebody safe that you can reach out to, a therapist or anybody that can help keep you grounded too, because you're talking to somebody in the present, even though your memories are dealing with people in the past and events happening. And I love that you do that. That shows like what a big heart you have, that you at least allow that, even if you can't always cater to it. Yeah. I think that for this demographic, especially, a lot of them don't have anybody that they can rely on, whenever they're going through a lot of this. And it's beautiful when they do, but sometimes the therapist, if they find a safe therapist, it might be their only, lifeline that they can reach out to in their time of need. And if they can't, that can be so like hurtful, even though, like you said, you need to also have boundaries. You have a family, you have a life. You can't just always be on call 24/7, but that shows what a big heart you have, that you at least let them reach out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And having those expectations set, because really, we talk about kids, and kids love boundaries, and like our clients, not to compare them to kids, but our clients, especially those that have such significant trauma in their life, really like to know their expectations. Yes. And so being able to set them up with that, I very rarely, so rarely do I ever like, oh, I really have to break this and like call this particular person. It has happened. That is kind of like the name of the game and the job. But just being able to give them that outlet has made a huge difference for them.
Absolutely. And another thing I wanted to ask, sort of along the same lines of, flashbacks can be one thing that need kind of a way to sort of simmer a little bit and help somebody through. And it can be really, really traumatic, obviously, both for the therapist and the client to go through them. Another thing that a lot of survivors deal with are things that they're terrified of and that they might not even be aware of, or else if they are aware of it, it can be very difficult for them to manage day-to-day life, are things like triggers, trigger words, codes, hand signals, different things that activated them in the past that abusers still can use to activate them, throw them back into programming, maybe lure them back into the cult. What are some ways as a therapist that you found, and you don't have to, give out specifics. I know we don't want to tell people what these different codes are and stuff, but just from kind of a general sense, how would you recommend a survivor start to dismantle these triggers and these different ways that they can be activated in real life in the therapy setting?
Right. I always like to talk about kind of like, and that us as therapists kind of have to understand that we might be the anchor person for a while, especially if we're talking about, say we know as a therapist, I know I'm working with those who have RAMCOA. So I know that situations are going to come up. I can be that anchor person. They can text and say, such and such. Like I'd rather them come to me first and say, ooh, what do you think? Than hopefully be pulled back in the other direction. And eventually we would kind of, maybe as we work through the deprogramming, being able for them to have another anchor person who is, and I do this even with those that I work with that have DID and schizophrenia, like they have that anchor person who can say, I see such and such in the corner. Do you see such and such in the corner? And like really kind of transferring that, I'm going to stay an anchor person, but transferring that to the outside of therapy room, of having that anchor person of, I believe that I see this. I believe that this is happening. And and then the other person being able to say like, okay, I understand. This is what we have created as like the safety plan or the plan, should these instances come up. So really know you're going to be an anchor person for a while. Know that with developmental trauma anyway, but definitely know this for those who have RAMCOA in their background.
Great answer. And there's triggers that are obviously things like codes and words, like I said. What are some helpful ways for triggers such as maybe Halloween decorations or seeing a scary movie, ways that somebody can sort of be thrown back into a triggering flashback, for example, or a memory that can kind of destabilize them? What are some ways that survivors can manage everyday triggers that might come up just in real life?
Yeah, so it's a tough one because we have everyday life kind of coming at us on a regular basis with holidays coming up. I know some, like with the holiday we just experienced, utilize different like names and putting their own spin on the particular celebration. So in times when triggers come up, kind of taking that and being like, no, this is, this is going to be my holiday, or this is going to be my tradition, or this is going to be my, knowing that the wound cuts very, very deep for those with RAMCOA. It's very, very deep. So you can't just trying to be, and we do this with trauma, those who have survived trauma anyway, we talk about like triggers. And like having an idea before it comes up, what could come up, like really just brainstorming, like things that could even be an issue. So we kind of have an aha when something does come up. Oh, I don't avoid all movies, but I just don't really like, rom-coms. I just stay away, like that type of situation. Giving them like, oh, you don't have to experience, if you don't like such and such, you don't have to do it, but you want to experience maybe these components of it. And it's coming in there and giving them the power and them the voice and them the choice of what they want to do.
That's really a good way to explain that, to sort of like take your power back. There is a survivor that I know. She talks a lot about one of her biggest triggers was around Halloween season. She'd had kids that didn't go, she broke the cycle, so her kids didn't go through the abuse that she did, and loved these different holidays, wanted to go to different grocery stores. And she was like, everywhere I went, you can't even go to like a normal grocery store or gas station without seeing ghouls and goblins and skeletons and like just these very triggering things, and she said she used to have to like look down and like have her children like walk her through the store around these things because it would just throw her off. And that was one of the things that she said she did too. She took the power back. She was like, okay, this isn't unsafe for me right now. Just like how we were talking about with fear, this is just a decoration. It's just something that somebody made and it's in a store. It's not here attacking me. I'm not in a ritual setting anymore. This isn't something that can scare me or harm me in this moment, even though it reminds me of stuff that could. And I think that's like a really powerful moment for survivors whenever they can switch that and take their power back from the people that abuse them and say, you know what, that's not going to affect me anymore. I'm not going to be destabilized from these things, even though it can be so hard in those moments. And I'm sure it's taken a lot for you to like help people coach through those moments, because sometimes these triggers can be everywhere depending on the season or depending on, the level of trauma somebody went through and how new they are to waking up to it. Uh-huh. So it is really important that they are able to gain a different perspective on these things and look at it in like a powerful and empowering way, instead of a way that makes them destabilized and makes them afraid to face the everyday world.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And so let's talk a little bit about, we've been talking about parts a little bit. And one thing I loved that you had this on your TikTok, I wanted to bring it up today, is recommending things that you would recommend clients and survivors, how they can deal with grief with losing or integrating parts, which is something that's always revered. You want integration, you want you want your parts to integrate, but it can also be a very painful process for survivors who end up, having certain parts or many parts or a couple parts that do end up integrating. How do you as a therapist help coach somebody through that?
Yeah. First and foremost, treating it like we're going through the whole grieving process, the real grieving process. And this could be because we've had sort of an integrative process. This could be maybe parts go dormant. This could be maybe parts come back after being gone for a long time. So like we're talking grieving kind of happens on various levels, and treating it like it's really happening and there is real grief. And you may go through as much as one can subscribe to like the stages of grief, like you're gonna go through that. I mean, it's part of the self. It's real living, breathing parts that are experiencing things and are quite often really significant components of one's life. And so you have to understand you may even have a funeral for a part. And that's not corny or kooky. It's that significant that maybe that part is no longer around, or maybe that part went dormant, or you may have to do things if you have a part that's awakening after being gone for so long and understanding that life is different. And it's really give yourself the permission. First and foremost, please don't feel guilty. You are doing nothing wrong. To take that shame and say, I'm not feeling shameful about this. This is really and truly something that affects me. And therapists, please encourage this. Like, when we lose somebody physically in the real world, what do? We mourn, we have wakes, we have, particular traditions that we have that we do. And maybe we take those traditions and we utilize that in the system and in this experience.
There was a podcast I listened to a while ago where a husband and wife were talking. The wife had DID. The husband was with her during her awakening and during her healing process. And they both, went through it all together over the course of a couple decades. And that was something he brought up, that she had all these parts in the beginning that he bonded to and that he took time to get to know and had relationships with for years. And eventually some of those parts, the wife felt it was time to integrate them, and so did the part. And he said it was just like such grief for him because he had bonded so closely to those parts where the wife was like, they're not literally like just leaving, they're just becoming more whole with me. Like, we're going to share the body now and like our mind, we're not going to be compartmentalized. And she felt really positive about it at the time that it happened. And he was the one grieving those parts. And I was like, gosh, it's interesting how this has so many different levels to it, depending on if it's a personal thing that somebody deals with, like how you were saying, a survivor integrating parts, and then also how it can affect people in a survivor's life if they're with them on that journey, and then integration ends up happening slowly or even right away. But, down the road, if certain parts integrate, how it can affect somebody else. They literally feel like they lost somebody too.
Mm-hmm. Because they did. They are. I mean, I know that they have to look at it differently, but, when we talk about the integrative process and what that looks like, but it's still like the feeling, it's still there and it still sits there and it still resonates through the body.
Yes, 100%. And so one of the things that we were talking about earlier was sort of like the overt and covert switching. And even though this isn't exactly that, a couple terms exist. You had mentioned even a few more earlier, but there's a couple different terms like DID, dissociative identity disorder. There's OSDD, other specified dissociative disorder. And maybe there's a couple other ones that are key in this conversation too. But I wanted to see if you could maybe explain the difference between some of these dissociative responses for people who are newer to them and maybe have only heard of just DID.
Yeah. So even though we talk about dissociative disorders are not rare, DID is not rare. One of the actual most diagnosed out of there, and maybe it's because some don't understand what's necessary and prevalency for the diagnosis of DID, which I think is quite often what's happening. But OSDD is very commonly diagnosed when we talk about the diagnoses for dissociative disorders. So when we think about dissociative identity disorder, that's where we definitely have the distinct self states. And that's usually 2 or more per the DSM. There's so much like question of like how much amnesia between parts, and like you get into that kind of muddies the waters a little bit. But you definitely will have distinct self states. You will definitely have amnesia, dissociative experiences, where people are like, yeah, I don't remember what I did yesterday. I don't remember 2 things happening, people eating and not realizing that eating has even taken place because other parts will, have that experience. That is usually kind of like very indicative of like a dissociative identity disorder, where you almost feel like it's more like fleshed out, more like barriers that you see. And when you get into an OSDD, the DSM-4, which I am not necessarily as privy to, because when I got into my graduate degree, it was the DSM-5, which started in 2013, had changed. OSDD is basically just kind of like a blurb. OSDD, otherwise specified. It's such a small chunk. It used to be broken down more to differing levels, which I kind of miss. OSDD, you have the dissociative experiences, but you may not have maybe as much of the amnesia component of it. And you may not have parts that are as significantly fleshed out as you would see in dissociative identity disorder. So interestingly enough, I kind of identify more with, I'm having OSDD. So like 1A, whereas I have self states, and I'm very connected to parts, but I don't have any barriers. It's kind of like, we're all just in a room. But I don't have as much of like maybe fleshed out parts where one can look internally, maybe with dissociative identity disorder, and actually see quite often various parts. Even internally in the internal world. And OSDD is, so the 1A has less amnesia, maybe less distinct self states, whereas like 1B, maybe you have a little bit more amnesia, but you have self states that go with that. So and I think I would venture to say that without having done a study yet, that a lot of people really do fall into that OSDD category, which I almost wish that there was like a different level other than like, let's throw them in otherwise specified. It's fine. Because
so it's like such a vague name.
Right. But I really and truly believe, like, I didn't even for my own self in this field really until I even just recently, I just read something. It was something about distinct self states, and I read it and I had like this aha moment of like, oh my gosh, because there's nothing like in the DSM itself is just a blurb. You kind of really have to go searching for information about it. And more so in the past, I've had dissociative experiences where I've lost days. I don't as much now because I'm very like particular about stuff and scheduling and making sure I know what's going on and that type of stuff. But yeah, so the difference is, although we don't see, we might see more OSDD category, doesn't mean that it's rare. And it doesn't mean DID is rare. It just means there really needs to be an examination of that component, because for so long I wouldn't have even put myself in one of those categories because I'm like, it's not me. And then it's like, oh no, okay, now I had to like do my own search and own information. to really get an idea of what the difference is as well. So much work needs to be done. So much work.
It really does. Oh my goodness. And sort of on that same line, therapists don't have a lot of access in their academia to this information. You've done a lot of, internal investigation as well as working with clients and research outside of the classroom setting. Have you come up with any assessments that would be really valuable for survivors, or therapists in sort of helping with the diagnosis of dissociative disorders?
So I do, you may get like varied therapists would say, yes, I assess. No, I don't assess. Now, I work with a lot of those who, when we talk about dissociation and the experiences, we can kind of put that disorder in there because it is upsetting their life enough. And so I will often help those who need to get on disability, who need to utilize this information for being able to kind of create a sustainable life. And so I do assessments. I utilize the SCID-D and the MID, understanding I have training in those components. I have particular write-ups for those components. And I always kind of preface this for clients of maybe what they might experience when they've taken these assessments. I've done these assessments for myself. Do I think it's necessary to have an assessment to understand we have dissociative experiences? No. If you don't feel like you need one, I wouldn't say that it's necessary. You just kind of work with your therapist based on the experiences that are causing the most difficulty in your life. But there is assessment. It is possible. It can be done ethically. The other component is just my experience. I really can kind of pull out just talking to a person, maybe like some of the things that they're experiencing. And that should always be part of the component of assessment, is you should have clinical experience and expertise.
And so really you think it's best as kind of an option to be there, not something mandatory that's pushed on every single person.
Right. Yeah. Right. And don't be so scared, as I know some therapists are like, they had to get permission from their supervisor to even diagnose me. No, you don't. It's not as big and scary as it seems. These are assessments. They're diagnostic assessments. They come with training. Get the training. Educate yourself. They can be helpful, and quite often, if you're clients who are having such significant difficulties with sustainability in their life, it can be useful for them. So I don't like to take one approach or the other as it has to be done, but I do utilize assessments and my own clinical judgment as well.
And then my last question for you, along these same lines of the lack of education received in academia, do you have any recommendations for resources or where a therapist should begin learning about DID, dissociative disorders, dissociation, if it's something that they too have not prior knowledge on and weren't privy to in school?
Yeah. So I absolutely love resources from those clinicians with lived experience, though they don't have to be the end all be all. You don't absolutely have to go to lived experience connections. I utilize information from ISSTD, the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. With understanding, I mix that. I absolutely mix that with information from Dr. Adrienne Fletcher, who is a psychologist with lived experience, just so I can kind of check the information. Because even though I have dissociative experiences myself, and I will read something and be like, I don't know if that's right. it's kind of nice to be able to have another lived experience voice in the field to be like, yeah, I don't think that is right. That kind of doesn't make sense to me. So ISSTD is great. Dr. Adrienne Fletcher is great. Dr. Jamie Merritt has great information. Unfortunately, her organization is going to be going through a change. So she had an institute as well with dissociative experiences trainings that I just even went through myself. Great trainings that are available that I absolutely recommend seeking out and understanding what it's like, what is parts work, what is dissociation, what does dissociative experiences look like, so you can really kind of get your firm ground footing for you're gonna come up with somebody who has RAMCOA. It's gonna happen. So best to be prepared.
Absolutely. And this wasn't part of the questions that I had for you, but in your ideal world, how could you see education improving? Have you thought of like any steps that we could take as a society or ways that we could push for this to get in academia? It just seems like such an uphill battle, but like, I just feel like it needs to happen. It's like, what do we have to do to push the snowball, you know?
Yeah. I would love to see in academia, whether you're going for your master's, no matter like what kind of degree that's going for towards your licensure. Mine happened to be licensed professional counseling because I'm an LPC. They have that psychopathology class, which covers, like I talked about, the bipolar and the schizophrenia, and those that have like that physiological structural changes that happen in the brain. I would love to see programs such as KCREP and those that have that are over like social work, have the separate class for those of trauma disorders. Same as you, like, don't even have like diagnosing and psychopathology, but like, let's take trauma, because it is such a significant, developmental trauma, attachment trauma. We're talking big T, little t trauma, all of that type of stuff really needs to be examined in its own class that is given its time and its understanding, because I think society as a whole is really understanding how, developmental trauma is a thing. Oh, attachment trauma is a thing. I mean, if you don't attach to your caregiver, you have thrice as likely to have X, Y, and Z go on. Yeah, that's really a thing, which is why we see kind of the evolution, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like parenting kind of evolving and changing and that type of stuff. But really just how significant trauma is in the everyday person and the everyday life. And yeah, in academia, please give us at the very least one full class of like really traumatology, trauma related disorders. The very least, just give us that.
Oh my gosh. It's like it should be just its own degree in itself. I've been like doing this podcast for just over 5 years, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what our brains and minds are capable of, the levels of dissociation, of what programming is. It's like the more you know, the more you don't know sometimes. And it's a very, very in-depth topic. And it's just crazy to me that it's like not even talked about at all. But I love all of your ideas. And I hope too that, more therapists can come forward and sort of start advocating. I know in the past, and I'm sure that you even experienced it on some level yourself, a lot of therapists who have come out alone sort of to talk about this, whether they run their own practice or they're working independently, to talk about RAMCOA or mind control and treating these different dissociative responses that their clients have. They've been so heavily targeted, whether it's by the Satanic Temple or the board that sort of, gave them their license, or universities, and it's really sad. And I feel like if more therapists that were doing this came forward and spoke up, what are they going to do? Take away the thousands of licenses? They could, but I would think that it would be smarter to just listen to them and to be like, if there's this many people standing up and like talking about this, maybe what they're saying and advocating for, that we add some of this to the curriculum, could be valuable. Maybe we listen to them, and I really hope that ends up happening, where more people, sort of come together and can face that fear of coming forward and speaking out as a group and a team, and figure out ways that we can approach this in a really ethical way, that's not doing this, in a way that is with something that could be looked at as negative, or ways that could be looked at as like getting revenge, for not bringing awareness to this, just in a really positive, ethical way. And I think therapists and clinicians, if anybody can do it, it's you guys. You guys are such a big voice for this community and can speak on this like so articulately. And I really hope to see this become something that you and others can help pave the way for, and create the information needed that we need in textbooks to empower upcoming therapists and future generations. And, even now more than ever, we need therapists that are trauma informed now, and more and more survivors are coming forward and waking up and needing help. And there's just not enough resources. You yourself have a completely packed schedule and can't even take on new clients, which is wonderful, but I wish that there was no lack of help. And sadly, there's a lot of therapists who won't take this on, or who won't speak up about it. So I just want to thank you for coming on, for all the work that you do, for your advocacy, and just for being such a voice. You speak for millions, and you're helping so many in your area. You're helping so many online. And I'm really grateful for you, Sara. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your website, to talk about your TikTok page, and to share about any way that people can get a hold of you and support you.
Yeah, absolutely. So on our website, we have not only information about us, we have the dissociative disorder resource area. And, it has kind of resources for other links that are on there. But also when you go down, we have kind of our own created section. And that's like, some of that's just based off of questions that I've received. Like one question was, how do I even bring up to my therapist? How do they even bring up RAMCOA? And so that's got a file on there that you can kind of go through, and it gives you like resources to be able to say like what you're experiencing and how to go through that. So those are some resources that are on the website. It's changing regularly. So by all means, just continue to peek back. There is a connect button on there for contact us. That email goes straight to me. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, that's always a good way to reach out. I am on TikTok, and I did do a foray into YouTube. So I am on YouTube as well. So I decided to give that a shot. And so I am available TikTok and YouTube. So I have some slightly longer videos on YouTube now. Not massively long, because my attention span is not that great either. But just longer than like the platform that's on TikTok. So yes, so you can reach out TikTok. You could always send messages. Really ask any of the questions that you want. Like I tell my clients, please feel free to ask. It does not hurt. You do not offend me at all. And I say it and I mean it. And if I can't answer it, I will probably tell you that I can't. I will probably research it first, is really what's going to happen, and then get back to you. But yeah, feel free to reach out on any of those platforms, any of those components, anything, any questions, or just, anything that you want me to research or look into or be aware of. By all means, feel free to reach out.
And one of the things that I love that you do with your videos is you take questions that people ask and turn them into a public video that people can watch. And you do it in a short way where the answer is concise and it's digestible. You post comments on there. You have your own insights from therapy to help explain. There's so many really good little questions that you ask and answer on here. And it's just like a gold mine of information. I love your TikTok and how you've designed it. And you've designed it to be, it's educational, but it's also like it's engaging. It's not too dark to listen to. It's not like all these horror stories. you just really shine a light on the positivity to be looked at, and like the awe and the way that we should be marveling at systems and parts and the wonders of them, the intelligence of a system, the different things that the quirks of it, and the way that it works, and different parts you talk about. And it's just really neat. I love how engaging it is, and just all the different aspects of RAMCOA that you do talk about, whether it's actual RAMCOA and just talking about it from a clinical perspective and treating it, or if it's talking about the side effects of it, which is dissociation and parts and systems. And you're just doing a really great job, Sarah. And I'm really happy that you have a YouTube too. I'm going to link that below. And like she was saying, she also has her website. So if you guys want to contact her that way, you guys can message her on TikTok. But if you're not on TikTok, you guys can just go to her website, and you guys can use the contact page there and connect with her as well. So Sarah, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this episode, or anything else that you wanted to share before we close up?
No, not that I can think of. Just thanks for having a platform where we can really talk about, it's real and it's happening and it needs to be talked about. And we need to have a place where these systems can come and get the help that they need and they deserve.
Yes, 100%. And thank you for pioneering that way, and for making it easily digestible and clinical, and for validating it through your work, through your experience, through your education, and especially your continued education. We're all better for you, Sarah, and I can't wait to watch you continue to grow in the community. And so you guys listening, please go support Sara. Go check out her website. Share it with people, especially the resource page. There are a lot of great resources on there. You guys can scroll down. I'll have that in the show notes. Connect with her on YouTube. Go lift her up. Share her videos if you can on your own social media. It's a free, easy way to support people helping the community, way to help break the algorithms. Sometimes this stuff gets a little bit suppressed. Same thing with her TikTok videos. Go engage, share, ask her questions. You guys can reach out to her personally there as well through the DMs if you guys want to talk with her with something other than business, and don't want to contact her through the website. If you want to just ask her a question, or if you guys want her to make a video on something, please go encourage her and go lift her up and ask her the questions. That way she can answer them and, maybe make a video of it, which is kind of fun. So I'll have all my information too in the show notes, you guys. I really, really appreciate all of your guys' support. We could not do this without you. You guys are the catalyst in helping the snowball, grow and get pushed up the hill and back down the hill in this movement. Otherwise we'd just be talking to an empty black hole. So we're so grateful for all of you guys, and so thankful for every survivor that has come forward and talked, and all of you who are braving healing and getting therapy and just listening and supporting. Thank you guys so much. Bless you all, and we will see you next time.